Hi, I'm Caroline Goodson, and I teach medieval history and archaeology at Cambridge.
I'm Julia Hillner, and I teach late antiquity at the University of Sheffield.
So if this video has arrived to you and you've clicked play, that's an indicator that you're interested in Rome. And we certainly are. We've spent a good part of our careers thus far thinking about the art and the archaeology and the history of Rome and the Rome of today. And one of the strongest impressions that most people have of Rome is its longevity, its really long life. There have been people living on those hills and at that bend in the river for over 2,000 years. And at every point in that history, the presence of the people who had come before was distinctly palpable. We've both worked with the British School at Rome in different capacities on archaeological projects, at conferences, at workshops, and Julia is now part of the Faculty of Arts and Letters. But we come to Rome from really different directions. So I'm American originally. I wrote a PhD on the 9th century in Rome, and I looked at a campaign of architecture that one pope built in Rome in the 9th century, and I was a fellow at the American Academy in Rome, across town. And in my new book, which is on urban gardening in early medieval Italy, there are an awful lot of Romans and their vegetable patches.
Yes, I'm originally from Germany, as you can probably hear, and a long time ago I wrote a PhD in ancient history on property ownership in late antique Rome, so between the 4th and the 6th centuries, which was essentially a very legal study. But while I was doing my PhD, I also worked as a tour guide in Rome, and I got a real kind of sense of the space of the city, and it's something that's always fascinated me, how Romans inhabit their space. Currently I write a book on Helena, the mother of Constantine the Great, who was the first Christian emperor, and she resided in Rome, so there's this continuous link to the city, and I'm again very interested in her spatial experience.
So we approach the city of Rome differently because of our backgrounds. German speaking, English speaking, our disciplinary formations, medieval archaeology and history, ancient history and classics, and the periods that we work on. Different approaches mean that we ask different questions, and we operate with different sets of assumptions about the city and its past.
Yeah, and it's very, very important to bring these assumptions together because, as Caroline said, Rome has a continuous history, but scholars often divide history in very artificial periods, in our case, late antiquity and the early Middle Ages. And that's a real shame, also on a scholarly level, because so much wonderful work is done in our respective areas. But there is often very little dialogue because of this artificial chronological divide, and that actually also plays out in the questions that people ask. So in our respective fields, scholars often orientate themselves around big institutions, and in our period this is, on the one side the emperor and on the other side the pope, and that's already a divide in terms of the transition from emperor to pope. So in my period, in late antiquity, the questions are often, where is the emperor? Where's the imperial household? How did this household work? How did the imperial bureaucracy work while the emperor was absent or present? And these are fascinating questions, but they're only really significant up to a point. Well, really only up to the 6th century, as long as Rome was an imperial capital.
And after it was an imperial capital, people might rightly ask, how could it be so important and so significant? It's true, Rome was no longer the imperial capital, but Romans remained profoundly influential across the Mediterranean and the wider post-Roman world, both because of the classical legacies of Rome and because of the Bishop of Rome, the Pope. But Rome is often studied as an idea in this period. more what other people thought about Rome or what it had been than what it actually was and what it felt like to live there. And so one of the things that we're interested in exploring is how it should be that, well, how the inhabitants of the city lived, how it should be that they commanded such authority and exerted such influence that kings would come to Rome to be anointed by its bishop, that Rome should have had the largest population of any urban center in Western Europe until the 10th century, and that Rome should have had the most diverse products for sale in its markets, drawing people from the British Isles or Baghdad.
Yes, we can only really study the social and economic histories of Rome if we bring together the widest possible range of scholars, because as Caroline said, Rome has been influential not just in the early Middle Ages but throughout its history. So it is actually studied not just in Rome or in Italy, but across the globe. So we want to reach out to these colleagues from elsewhere in Europe, from Britain, from North America, and so on, to bring together these bodies of knowledge that we then want to compare and contrast.
That comparison is really important, because in both of our respective periods, scholars often anchor their research around an institution. As Julia said, in the ancient period, people often position themselves around where is the emperor and how did people interact with him. And in the early medieval period, people often position themselves around the papacy and how people interacted with the papacy. This is not to say that the only kind of history one can do of Rome in this period is an institutional administrative history, far from it. But this is an example to explain why it's actually really useful to compare and to integrate research across the period from late antiquity to the early Middle Ages.
Yes, and integration is really important, because one of the things we would like to do especially is to bring historians and archaeologists together. So I'm a historian, Caroline is an archaeologist, and we know we have a lot of kind of interests in common, but we work with very different methods and we work with very different evidence, and the questions we ask, but particularly also the answers we get can be very different. And I know this from my own PhD. If you read about a house in a legal text and then go out in Rome and try to find it in the material fabric, these are completely different approaches, and we really need to bring together these different types of scholarship to have a proper conversation about early medieval Rome.
It's not just that the methods that we use are really different. It's also the fact that the archaeological record of Rome is expanding. So the excavations in the 1980s at the Crypta Balbi, the excavations of the Comune of the Via dei Fori Imperiali, these radically transformed our understandings of the city in antiquity and in the post-classical period. The new work that's emerging around the new underground line, the Metropolitana Linea C, that stands to do the same thing. So we want to hear about what these excavations are producing, and we want to integrate this new knowledge not only with our sort of current understanding of the topography of Rome, but also use it to reconfigure and reshape our questions about the economy, society, and daily life of people in Rome, and the experiences of people who lived there.
Yes, I think our key focus will be this daily life, the experience of Romans in the city, because Rome was never just the largest political body that ruled it or that inhabited it, be that emperor or a pope or some other institution. Throughout history, but particularly in the early Middle Ages, where there was a power vacuum, Romans were often surprisingly able to organize themselves and to develop local forms of administration, which we want to study. But we really want to also look at structures of life, working patterns, male and female experiences, the shape and the identity of of communities. So things that were of concern to ordinary Romans, everything really from putting dinner on the table to caring for their dead.
Right, so we want to imagine the history of Rome as an urban history. Scholars of ancient and medieval Rome have often considered Rome to be entirely exceptional. And by many accounts, it was. It was the imperial capital of the Mediterranean world. It was the center of the Christian church. And for all of those reasons and more, it was bigger, richer, and more diverse than anywhere else in the West. So it's easy to see why we would presuppose that it's exceptional. But we'd like to think about Rome as a city like other cities. It might have been the best achieved example of a city in the first millennium in the West, but it was one that held a lot in common with other cities and indeed influenced other cities. So we want to employ some of the tools of urban history, like when we think about spatial relationships across neighborhoods in different parts of the city, or when we think about local interactions of Romans with foreigners who came to the city. We start to get a really different and new picture of Rome. And that helps us to see this not just as the phase of Rome after empire or before things got really going with the papal monarchy, but as part of a sort of long evolving history of the city, which had considerable wealth and political prestige. Part of that prestige came from Romans' awareness of their past, and their creative manipulation of that relationship to the past. But another part of it came from entirely new networks of trade and diplomacy, and the opportunities that arose out of living in a large city.
Yes, and in order to study well, the religious and the political histories of Rome, as lived experience within social and economic structures, we're organizing a conference at the British School of Rome in June next year, 2021. Fingers crossed it will actually happen. It's a conference that's sponsored by the British Academy as one of their 6 official 2021 conferences. It's entitled Reassessing Rome After Empire, an Urban History Approach, and it will take place at the British School of Rome because there is no better place to have these conversations than the British School at Rome.
Thank you.
Thank you.